Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, your go-to source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We hope you tune in often for all things people management, organizational development and change, organizational leadership, and social impact related. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI podcast episode, I talk with David R. Fullmer about business immigration and human capital. David Fullmer, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you, John. I'm really happy to be here today.
Yeah, it is a pleasure to be with you. I'm super excited to have a nice conversation today. We're going to be focusing on immigration law, particularly business immigration, and the impact that we see that having on corporations and really the world of work and human capital, what this really means, currently as well as moving into the future, and what organizational leaders need to be paying attention to. As we get started, I wanted to share David's bio with everybody. David R. Fullmer is a partner in the Los Angeles office of WR Immigration, one of the largest immigration law firms in the United States. He has worked in the field of immigration law for 25 years and is the past chair of the immigration section and chair of the LA County Bar. In 2021, he was recognized as Best Lawyer's Immigration Lawyer of the Year in Los Angeles. As a business immigration attorney, he assists organizations of all sizes in establishing and maintaining programs for hiring non-U.S. talent on work visas and assisting employers with their immigration compliance obligations. That's wonderful. And this is an increasingly complex area of the law and something that organizations have to be grappling with, both in terms of trying to get great talent, but also dealing with the legal compliance components of all of this. So it's going to be fascinating to explore this with you and get all of your insights. I appreciate you spending time with me and my listeners today. Before we jump on into the conversation, anything else you would like listeners to know by way of your background or personal context?
No, I think you did a great job of covering it. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's dive right on in then. And maybe you can start by just laying out the general landscape for immigration law currently as it pertains to labor and organizations, desires to employ good talent from anywhere around the world.
Definitely. Immigration law is a pretty broad topic, and it often gets political. There are different kind of areas of immigration law. There is, family-based immigration, which most people know about. If you marry a U.S. citizen, or if you have a close relative who's a U.S. citizen, you can help them immigrate. There is also humanitarian-based immigration. There's a lot of talk about all the people from Afghanistan coming to the U.S. as refugees. And then we have, there's investment-based immigration, which is kind of a hybrid between employment-based and an individual process. This is where foreign investors can invest money in the United States, set up companies, employ people, and either get visas or immigrate based on that. And then you have the big thing that I deal with, which is employment-based immigration. This is where companies can obtain work visas and permanent residency for foreign workers that companies need to employ for their businesses. The largest and the most commonly used visa in this process is called the H-1B visa. I think most people know about it. Tens of thousands of people come to the United States every year on H-1B visas. They can be renewed, and then if an employer needs to keep someone long-term, they can petition the Department of Labor and U.S. Immigration to keep them long-term. So really, that's the field that I deal with most of the time.
Yeah, thank you for laying that out. That's super helpful just for context. And you're based in California. California has all of its own extra layer of labor law and compliance issues and those sorts of things. So we don't necessarily need to get into all the nitty gritty of all the differences in California specifically. Many listeners are, from across the country, really even across the globe. But as we zoom out a little bit and we just think about labor related immigration more broadly, and we think about it, across the US, but even globally, what are some of the types of things that we need to be thinking about in terms of both the compliance issue, certainly, but also just in terms of an organization's ability to attract and retain top talent in a day and age where we don't feel as geographically bound as perhaps we did before?
Yeah, that's a very good question, John. When the pandemic started, I kind of wondered if my industry, if my profession was going to eventually go away because people don't need to be in a specific place. Now we're almost 2 years into it, and I can tell you it has not slowed down. People are able, especially in the technology field, yes, they're able to work on global remote teams, but there is going to be a need for people to be as close together as possible, and definitely in the same country in many cases. I've seen situations where companies tried to hire someone, say in India, and have them work a US schedule. And that only works for so long. The person usually can't keep up with having to work all night. And then there's the need to be together. So yes, I don't think immigration law is going away because we have Zoom. What I'm seeing is that in the United States and worldwide, there is an explosion in business and innovation along the lines of technology. Here in California, Silicon Valley is a huge hub for innovation, and there's so much startup activity there. Here in Los Angeles, we have a lot of startup activity. Throughout the United States, us in Texas, there in Utah, in Florida, there's a tech hub. We have so many companies innovating, creating startups. Venture capital is very active, and unfortunately, in the United States, our university students are not studying and graduating with degrees in technology at the same pace as innovation is happening, and as startups are happening, and as companies are needing these individuals. So we have a demand that exceeds the supply. What we normally do, we import, and that's really what business immigration is all about: bringing in top-notch talent in the United States to fill these positions.
Yeah, and that gap has existed for a while now. It's only become more and more acute over time. You talk about any STEM field, and there's already been a labor shortage and gap there from what we have in the US versus what the labor demand is. But even beyond STEM, I mean, when we just think about the general the nature of the labor market, even pre Great Resignation. I mean, right now everyone's struggling to get jobs filled in all sorts of categories, STEM or not. Like, it's just hard to get good people. But even pre Great Resignation, it was still a challenge because you have baby boomers retiring in droves, and just all these different factors, the rise of the gig economy, and younger people not wanting to work in traditional corporate jobs. And so for all these reasons, we've increasingly needed to be able to tap into talent internationally. And it, like you said, in some cases it works really well. They can work remotely. They can be, anywhere in the world. In other cases, we want them here with us. And then we have to deal with the legal immigration issues.
That's true. And, sometimes at that higher end, the executive or the computer professional, they can work overseas for a period of time, but there are some positions, and, on the entry level or in areas like hospitality, manufacturing, they cannot work remotely. They have to be here in person. And there's a huge shortage on that end too. I think we've all walked into restaurants and seen that, sorry, we're closed because we don't have any staff, or you're gonna have to wait a long time. We're all waiting for our orders from Amazon because there's no truck drivers to deliver, and there's shipping problems. So yeah, there is a shortage in the United States and elsewhere of people who are willing and able to really get their hands dirty, roll up their sleeves and work.
Yeah, and it isn't just a U.S. problem. Like, this certainly it's very relevant to the labor market here in the US. But this is a global issue, and the lack of tech talent, STEM talent in particular, or other fields like healthcare, also a huge ongoing issue. So if I'm a firm and I want to hire top talent from somewhere else in the world, what are some of the things I need to be thinking about in terms of just the legal complexities of making that kind of a hire, and then dealing with all the compliance-based issues?
Yeah, you bet. Some companies, when they look into it a little bit, they realize they have to file some kind of application with the federal government, and it has to do with immigration. They say, no, we don't want to touch that. It's too complex. It's controversial. We don't want to even go there. And I think companies first need to realize that it's not impossible. It's not that difficult. Sure, there's a cost, but it is something that's very doable, and it's done by most of the largest companies in the country. Most of the time, they will need some assistance. If a company's never done it before, it's very unlikely that they would have the internal expertise to be able to do it on their own. And then they need to start, once they've opened their eyes and kind of agreed that they're going to do this, open their eyes to those resumes that are coming in who were not in the US, or maybe opening their eyes to the application from the foreign student who is in the United States and who is graduating with either a 1-year open work permit, or sometimes a 1-year extendable work permit that will allow them to work for 3 years without any sponsorship. Open their eyes to those possibilities, and then they're going to see those applicants, because if they're posting technology jobs, they're getting those applicants from the foreign students or from the people who are overseas.
In the world of higher education, I'm a professor. I also do, consulting and things like this podcast on the side. But in the world of higher ed, it's also super common to hire international scholars and professors to come and work at universities. And I've seen at my own university a real hesitancy to really go through that process to hire foreign professors. Now we have plenty of foreign professors,
right?
So it does happen, but there's definitely a hesitancy there, and a concern. I think many organizations are this way, and in higher ed we tend to be kind of slow moving, conservative, perhaps risk averse, and so there's a concern about the legal components, and just a desire to not have to deal with those sorts of things if at all possible. What would you say to leaders, administrators in a higher ed space versus, say, in a tech company who may be wrestling with whether or not they want to try to go down this path?
Well, I would say that the immigration law is really structured to give preference to higher education. Just as an example, when a company would like to hire an individuals on an H-1B, and if the person has never had an H-1B, the company has to go through a lottery process because there is a higher demand for H-1Bs than Congress has allowed. However, if a university would like to hire a professor or another staff member on an H-1B, there's no lottery. In the private sector, there's a specific timeline. In fact, it's coming up. Private companies need to start now so they can put their lottery applications in for the end of March so that they can get the workers started in October. So it's a long ramp up time. Universities don't have to worry about that. There's no annual cycle. There's no lottery. And they also have preference when it comes to obtaining permanent residency for foreign workers. A company has to advertise a job and show that there are no minimally qualified U.S. workers in order to obtain permanent residency. A university simply has to show that they did a competitive recruitment and that the person they hired was the most qualified. Well, that's the standard that universities use when they organize a search committee to find someone anyway. So universities definitely, there is some red tape, there is some compliance, but it's much easier for universities than it is for the private sector. I love working with universities. I represent some universities, and many of the challenges that we see in the private sector are not there in higher education. So I would encourage universities to open their eyes. Our US students deserve the very best education that we can provide them. And so if there's this amazing professor in Italy who can teach about art history, And if they're the most qualified person, why not bring them on? Let our students benefit from that talent, or whatever the field might be. So I highly encourage looking at work visas and immigration for in the higher ed space.
I'm excited to announce the publication of my new book from HCI Press, Bluer Than Indigo Leadership: The Journey of Becoming a Truly Remarkable Leader. Early in my adult life, I learned about an Asian proverb that translates as bluer than indigo. If you think about the color indigo, it is a brilliant, deep, and vibrant blue, what some would call the bluest of blues. To have something that is bluer than indigo is rare and truly remarkable. Contrary to popular myth, there is no one-size-fits-all or cookie-cutter approach to effective leadership. There's no silver bullet, no secret sauce, no go-to model that will solve all of our problems. The truth is, great leaders have all had their unique strengths and flaws, and have all had to discover and then pave their own distinctive path in their life's journey to fulfill their leadership potential. Bluer Than Indigo Leadership will help you discover your own path and explore those ordinary, everyday actions that will help you respond to an uncertain future and produce extraordinary results for individuals, teams, and organizations. Yeah, I love it. And I think, it's interesting, just zooming out from immigration law for a second, and just thinking about labor and employment law. Being both labor and employment related consultant, and I'm a professor in the space as well. And then I see, administratively, I see the Office of Legal Counsel and Legal Affairs for the university, or the internal HR department, and some of the policies or interpretations that they have, and that influence what they end up doing. I can see that, and perhaps from a different perspective than the average faculty member at the university. And I have to admit, like, most of the time I scratch my head and I'm like, that's a really overly conservative kind of an approach. That they don't need to be so boxed in that they seem to feel like they have to be. But that's not my. Sometimes I speak up and I'll push back and challenge, but it's not exactly my place or my role at the university. So,
but generally speaking, when you get a lawyer involved, their job is to avoid risk. So often they'll take the most conservative position, and that's their job. They'll look at the risks and the liabilities, and they'll say, I don't recommend it because of X, Y, Z. And then you have in a company, it's the business unit, university. Perhaps it's the academic side who needs the talent, and they push back. And then often there's a negotiation and a meeting in the middle. And as an immigration attorney, sometimes I'm kind of in the middle there, helping them negotiate and work out something that works both from an operational perspective and from a compliance and risk management perspective.
Yeah, super interesting. So, and you've already referred to this a little bit. But maybe we could talk a little bit more specifically about how the pandemic has really impacted immigration law, I suppose, generally, but immigration law specifically related to labor immigration, and the human capital needs of organizations.
Yeah, you bet. In December of 2019, we're talking about when the pandemic really got going. I guess it was March of 2020, December 2019, we started hearing about the coronavirus, COVID-19 in China. And that's when President Trump did something which was, at the time, was kind of controversial. He said, well, Chinese people cannot come into the United States. And there was a big uproar about that. And then as coronavirus started circling the world, went to Europe and the UK, and really got bad in places like Brazil, India. The US locked down those countries. They put a travel ban on, in the end, 33 countries. And what that meant was that unless people fit into a narrow exception, they could not come to the United States, even if they had a visa. Now, of course, there was an exception. US citizens and people with green cards could still come back home, but foreign people could not come into the United States. And so what we had is a lot of foreign workers here in the United States, and they couldn't go home for a long time. So that we had these workers who were really worried. For example, when the pandemic was really raging in India, and had these guys on H-1Bs who wanted to go home and help take care of their parents, and they couldn't, because if they left, they would not be able to come back. That's one thing. Another thing that happened was, companies had made offers to people overseas that had got tentative approvals, but they could not bring those people to the United States. And so for a period of time, and this ended in this past November, there was, things were on hold. If someone was in the United States, they had to stay in. And if somebody was outside of the United States, it was very hard to get them into the United States. What we had to do then was look at the exceptions that were available. And the law said that if there is a compelling national interest that you could demonstrate to the US consulate, then the person could come into the United States in spite of the ban. And so we were spending a lot of time working on these national interest exceptions. Those bans were lifted on November 6th. There was a short ban put on South Africa and 6 other African countries because of the Omicron variant. Those are gone now. And so things are normalizing a lot. But what we're seeing now is that throughout the world, most of the US consulates have a really long backlog, a really long wait to get an appointment because things were locked down previously. So maybe that's more than you wanted to hear, but those are some of the dynamics.
Yeah, and that obviously that everything you just described has had a huge impact on individuals and families. It's also had a big impact on organizations trying to wrestle with their human capital needs and the availability of that talent, even people they've already made offers to, or people who are already employed, but for whatever reason, like you said, they found themselves sort of stuck one way or another. And now, there's been multiple variants. Now we're in the middle of the widespread Omicron variant. Here in Utah, for example, yesterday we set the record by the number of positive cases. It was something like 7,000. The previous record back in like December of 2020, which was the previous spike, was like 4,500. So which is this huge leap, and it's right. It's spreading like wildfire. And so, thankfully it seems to not have as much of a strong health impact on people. So people who are catching it aren't getting as sick, aren't getting hospitalized as much. So that's a good thing, but it seems to be much more transmissible. And so it'll be interesting to see how things play out. We're close to 2 years into this thing, and we're still talking about it. We're still dealing with it. And who knows? So all of everything you've been describing, we on the one hand, we would say, okay, pandemic related immigration law and labor law, something that is going to fade away, and we're going to be able to get past it. But I'm not so sure. Like, we're still kind of in the middle of it. So what would you say? What would you say to organizations that are still wrestling with the uncertainty around the pandemic and trying to figure out who to make offers to and how to deal with their human capital needs?
Well, I'll tell you, again, we're almost 2 years into this. When this thing started, I had corporate clients that I work with who kind of fit into different categories. Some decided, we're in this pandemic, we're just going to wait until it's done before we do anything, before we make any more offers to foreign nationals, before we do any more visas. We're just going to kind of freeze our program. Others said, well, this thing will end. And if we, David, what steps can we take now so that we'd be better situated to fill our talent needs as soon as these bans are lifted? And so the companies that took the second position and decided to move ahead, well, they got their people a long time ago. Sure, it took longer than it would have taken if there were no pandemic, but they were able to move ahead and work through the issues and get their talent, where other people who stopped eventually, they most of them came back to me and said, okay, well, this thing isn't going to end. What can we do? So my advice has been and is, business people need to kind of make the decision about what kind of risks they want to take in business, but it is possible to take steps even in a pandemic to fill your talent needs.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, David. It has been a real pleasure. I note the time, and I'm going to have to let you go here in just a few minutes. But before we close, I wanted to give you the chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, find out more about your work, your team, what you can do for them, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Okay, you bet. If people want to contact me, they can follow me on LinkedIn. They can go to my law firm's website, which is www.wolfsdorf.com. That's WOLFSDORF.com. They can call me at 310-570-4065. Yeah, I am based in Los Angeles. Wolfsdorf Rosenthal, or WR Immigration, is a national immigration law firm. We have 2 offices in Los Angeles, 2 in the San Francisco Bay Area, Boston, New York, and Shanghai. And we have the capacity to handle all kinds of business immigration issues for almost any organization. Final word, I guess, I wanted to leave on a bright note. Because the administration is dealing with kind of recovery from the pandemic, the world opening up, now they're looking at some areas where they can be more flexible. And very recently, the State Department has announced that they will waive interviews at U.S. consulates for certain cases that are most likely approvable. And this is a big change, and it's going to help companies when they need to bring employees in from overseas. You know, in some places the appointment backlog is 6 months long, and with the ability to waive interviews and have people either drop their passports off in their Dropbox or mail them in, that's a big change for the positive. We're very excited about that, and for in other ways that the federal government is really working with the corporate world to try to facilitate things. So I think there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Good. And it's always good to end on a positive note. Thank you, David. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what David can do for you. Check out the firm. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership. Ordinary, everyday actions that produce extraordinary results. Consider how the nature of work has shifted over the past 50 years. With increased globalization, rapid technological advancement, and the shift in economic composition, the average job of today looks very different than the average job of 50 years ago. What will the jobs and organizations of tomorrow look like? Moreover, what does this all mean for organizational leaders? What are the core competencies and capabilities of organizations and their leadership that are prepared for continued disruption and geopolitical and socioeconomic shifts? Regardless of what the future holds, increasingly, leaders need to be socially minded, data-driven, decisive, champions of talent, and disruptors of the traditional notions of leadership, teams, organizations, and work. The alchemy of truly remarkable leadership will help you to explore your own leadership competencies and capabilities and consider ways to apply and implement them into your workplace and personal life. Check out Human Capital Innovations magazine, Human Capital Leadership. Human Capital Leadership is a free, interactive e-magazine with the mission to help individuals, leaders, and organizations find innovative approaches to maximize their human capital potential. We publish issues quarterly in August, November, February, and May. Take a look at the latest issue and let us know what you think. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.